Howdy folks, welcome to another beautiful day out here in West Vancouver. In today's video, I'm just going to go over the timeline or our immigration timeline so far, just to give you an idea of what we did and how long it took us to get it done. Purely because a lot of people have been asking. Now, you know, one thing I do have to say is that just the fact that that's how it worked for us does not mean that that is how it's going to work for you. It really depends on the path that you're following. It depends on the time. You know, there's just so many variables. But in any case, it should give you an indication of what the immigration process is like, because it can become a painful wait. But before we go there, I just wanted to say today is one of the most beautiful days I've had here. You know, we woke up this morning, it's the 28th of February. It was snowing, everything was white and it was snow everywhere, absolutely beautiful. And then suddenly around midday it started raining, it cleared up, and now we have a beautiful sunshine out on that side. It's so pretty. Anyway, so immigration timeline. Now, just to give you a bit of a background on how we did our immigration. I don't have any official qualifications, only high school, so I couldn't qualify for a PR. Belinda has a degree, but she also didn't qualify. She was a few points short to apply for PR, purely because, you know, we both a little bit older already. So we couldn't do the PR route, and after speaking to a lawyer, we decided to run with the work permit route to get into Canada, and then to do the PR, because when we got here, if Belinda got a job, it would put her in the space where she then has enough points to apply for the PR. Anyway, sorry, I wrote all of the dates down because otherwise I'm never going to remember them. Basically what happened was we were stuck in the US in 2020, early 2020, during COVID, when everything was locked down. We were supposed to go back to South Africa, but we ended up not going back to South Africa because we missed the repatriation flights. And to be quite frank, we weren't very sorry about it. We felt that being in Florida was a good place to be during a pandemic when you don't know what's going to happen, rather than being in South Africa. So anyway, we were stuck in Florida at the time, and Belinda said, hey, we need to start settling down. We need to decide where we're going to live. The kids need to go to high school, or they're in high school now and they need a bit more stability. So we started off by first deciding where we wanted to go. We had a couple of options. We could stay in Florida and apply for green cards. We could come to Canada, or we could go to Portugal. After a family vote, we decided on Vancouver because we all loved Vancouver in the times that we visited it. So roughly early June, we made the decision to move to Canada. I posted on one of the Facebook groups, the Canadian Facebook groups. We joined a bunch of those, posted on one of them, and somebody referred a lawyer to us. Guy called Des Friedland from Vancouver. I mean, great guy. So on the 10th of June 2020 was the first time that I actually contacted Des, and we started talking about this process. And I must say, the dude was very, very helpful, because I mean, we didn't know how we were going to get in. And he just kind of worked with us, listened to my story, and he said, okay, what we can do is we can get you in on a work permit as an owner-operator of your own company. Because at the time, I had shares in a company in Vancouver. I didn't have all the shares, I was just a shareholder in the company. We were 3 partners. So he said, if you own more than 51% of the shares in the company, you can come in as an owner-operator on a work permit. So that is the route that we decided to take. And then once we're here as a work permit, we could find Belinda a job, and when she has a job, she qualifies for PR. So that was the plan. Anyway, spoke to Des on June the 10th, paid Des a deposit of $3,750 on June the 11th, because, you know, lawyers and immigration agents do not work for free. Anyway, $3,750, which was a 50% deposit for our work permit applications that he managed. On June the 13th, we sent the first documents to him, and then the whole process started of getting our documentation ready, because the first thing I had to do is I had to buy a few more shares in the Canadian company to push me over the 51%. In the end, I ended up buying all the shares and ended up with the whole company. So I had 100% of the company, which gave me the best shot on being approved for this work permit. And then, you know, the other thing that we started doing is we really went through all our documentation and we tailor-made the documentation to the application, which is something you should really do. I'm not saying doctor the documentation. We didn't go and lie or anything. We just changed the wording. We changed a bunch of things. Changed my LinkedIn profile to align more with what is required and what they would be looking at. And the whole point is to just make it simple for the person that's going to go through your application to tick the boxes. So for example, I mean, on LinkedIn, I was called at one stage, CEO or publisher or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but that's not what they were looking for. I was coming in as a publisher of the owner-operator publishing company. So I changed the LinkedIn profile to say publisher. So if the person goes to LinkedIn, I mean, it's really simple. He wants to be a publisher. Oh yes, he is a publisher, if that makes sense. So anyway, we spent about 2 months getting our documentation ready, doing the company purchase, doing the share certificates, changing the LinkedIn profiles, updating the CVs, going back in time and finding all of the relevant experience and everything, and getting all of those documentation ready. Because the thing is, when you do an application like this, it's better to have more information than you need, because you need to have overwhelming evidence that this is really that it's really good for Canada. Anyway, so on July the 14th, 2020, which is a month later, we got the first LMIA application draft from Des. Now, an LMIA is a Labour Market Impact Assessment, which is done by Services Canada to see whether granting you a work permit what the influence will be on the Canadian labour market. I mean, you don't want to give work permits to people that's going to come and take jobs away from Canadians. That's basically the bottom line. We got the LMIA application draft, we worked through it, realized there's a few more things that we needed, because trust me, there's a crap load of paperwork that you need to do. Anyway, so I went through that, made a few changes, aligned a few other things, and then eventually on August the 24th, so basically 2.5 months after we made the decision, we submitted our labour market impact application. No, actually I lie. On August the 14th, we submitted our labour market impact assessment application. So literally 2 months after we spoke to Des the first time, roughly. 10 days later, we got a reference number that says that our LMIA application is now in the process and it's happening. Now, at the time, Des told us that it was going to take about 5 months to get the LMIA approved, because that's how long it took at that time. So he says, well, it's in now go and relax for 5 months, because only then you'll hear something. Luckily, it did not take that long at all. So within 2 months, on October the 29th, so 2.5 months later, I got an email from Services Canada that they wanted to schedule an interview and interview me for the LMIA application. So we scheduled the interview for November the 3rd, so 4 or 5 days later, so very quickly onto it. And did the interview. The lady asked a bunch of questions, what's your plans, why you want to do it, blah, blah, blah. We went through it. It wasn't rocket science. I mean, it was just a simple little interview. Afterwards, she said, okay, well, since you're coming in as a publisher of these books, you're bringing business to Canada, I can see that it's not going to have any impact on the local labour market, and you are going to employ some Canadians, so I think I'm good, I'll approve your application, which was absolutely awesome. After the interview, I was like, yay! Anyway, and then the lady got sick and she went on leave, so we actually only got the decision letter on November the 16th. Pretty much 2 weeks later, we got the decision letter that said my LMIA was approved, which was great news, because once you have your LMIA approved, your work permit is pretty much just it's just a formality, because that's what they look at. The work permit, they look at, oh, you've got an LMIA, there's a few other things they check, and then they're like, okay, you're good to go. At that time, though, we had the option, because there's 2 ways that we could do this work permit application. Or get this work permit processed. The one is to go back to South Africa, which we were actually on our way to South Africa for the December holidays, because flights opened and we could start flying back. and then apply at the embassy over there. But the lawyer warned us. He said, hey, don't do it that way, because when you apply at the embassy in South Africa, it can take up to 3 months for them to approve it, because they need to go through all the paperwork. And he said, and oftentimes, well, not often, but occasionally, work permits got declined in South Africa, even though the LMIA was approved. He says he doesn't know why, but he works with a lot of South Africans, and it happened. So he was a little bit concerned about that. Luckily for us, what happened was we visited some friends in Canada and Montreal in 2019 December. We spent Christmas in Canada. And then from Canada, early January 2020, we went back to the US, and we were in the US the whole time until our LMIA got approved. And what that did is it made us qualify for flag polling, which is a whole other story. But if you're in Canada and you go only to the US and you come back, then they can process your work permit application right there at the border. So the agents there do it on the spot. You don't submit anything, you don't send it in, you just do it right there. So we qualified for flag polling, which was sensational. So in other words, we basically, I decided to fly up from, we were in Tampa at the time, in Florida. So I flew up to Seattle, rented a car, and drove to Peace Arch to the border, drove through the border, and got my work permit on the spot. Belinda had a file this thick with all the documentation, LMIA, everything else, proof of funds, the whole story. Stopped at the border, handed it to them, and they were like, took about an hour, approved it, all done. So then we flew back to South Africa, spent Christmas with the parents, and on January the 20th, we arrived in Canada. So January the 20th, 2021, we arrived in Canada. And then the job search started for Belinda. And to be quite honest, that was actually quite a rough patch, because, also once again, Belinda had an open work permit. So first we needed to get the work permits and everything sorted. And then we had a bunch of other crap because passports expiring and stuff like that. So eventually we only managed to get our work permits approved a couple of months later, or Belinda's work permits, open work permit properly approved a couple of months later. And then the job search started in all earnest. And it was not easy because, the thing is, Belinda, she's also been an entrepreneur. She's also worked for herself for the last 15, 20 years. So it was really hard to find a job because she's not, she doesn't have that resume that says I've been a manager or a this or a that, or an entrepreneur. And a lot of the jobs kind of, they're very kind of sticky in Canada about job descriptions. So it was quite a long process. And then, of course, also she had to find a specific type of job. She had to find some sort of managerial post to qualify for the points that was needed to actually get us so that she could apply for the PR. Anyway, long story short, on November the 8th, 2021, so literally 10 months later, Belinda finally got a job after a bunch of interviews and sending out hundreds of CVs. So the reason I'm telling you that is just bear in mind that it might be a mission to find a job, but also bear in mind that eventually you will come right. It does happen. So Belinda found the job on November the 8th, 2021. On December the 23rd, 2021, we had all the paperwork ready. I mean, we started moving immediately. As soon as she found the job, we really started getting all the paperwork ready because we decided to go for a provincial nominee program, provincial nomination program. So we got all the paperwork ready. And then we couldn't actually submit it immediately. That was funny because one of the requirements for a provincial nominee program is that the company that she works for must be a year old, it was a year old or 2 years old. There was a timeline of what the company how long the company must have existed. And what happened was the company that Belinda worked for actually just combined, they amalgamated, so it was a newly formed company. Even though the company has existed forever, it was still kind of seen as only on paper a year-old company, and it turned a year old on December the 23rd. So we literally submitted the LMIA or the PNP application on December the 23rd, on the day that the company turned a year old, officially turned a year old. Anyway, so December 23rd, 2021, we submitted the PNP application. March 23rd, we received the PNP nomination, so 3 months later. April 15th, we submitted the PR application, because from March 23rd to April 15th, we just got our paperwork ready in order, worked with an immigration agent again, which cost us another $4,500 to get that done. Submitted the PR application, and then we started waiting. So April 15th to November the 4th, we finally received the first information. We got the pre-arrival letter. November the 4th. Made us very, very happy. We were like, oh, pre-arrival letter, this is imminent. Now it's time, we're going to get it. November the 8th, they requested our medicals. November the 10th, we finished our medicals. November the 25th, we passed our medicals, or got nomination, confirmation that we passed our medicals. And then we were like, right, now it's going to happen. Which it didn't. On January the 12th, they requested biometrics. On January the 13th, we had the biometrics done. You can see here that we moved pretty fast. Belinda's like that. If they ask for something, we get it to them. We got the biometrics done. And now we are in February the 28th and still waiting for the official PR letter. We haven't received anything else yet. So we'll keep you updated and let you know if anything changes and when the actual PR comes through. In the meantime, you all must have a beautiful day. Cheers.